Okay, we are live.
We are.
Good night, all. Welcome to the show. Tonight, I'm Caleb Johnston, and I have with me tonight.
I am Clinton Wilcox.
Welcome to the show, Clinton. Glad to
Thank you
have
very
you
much.
back with us.
Yeah, glad to be here. I was gone in New Mexico last week, so good to be back on the live stream.
Travels go okay?
Yeah, they went pretty good. I drove my niece to New Mexico with me and came back all by myself.
And that's a pretty big haul, isn't it?
But it's good. It's a good length of driving. It's what is it? Probably a 15-hour drive, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that's a bit of a haul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I usually just stay in Phoenix, Arizona on the way going, make it in 2 days, and on the way back I stay in Blythe, California. That's roughly Blythe is roughly halfway between the two. Phoenix is a little more than halfway, so that kind of makes the second day of driving a bit easier than the first.
That's always a good thing when you're taking those long road trips.
Yeah.
So the longest trip I've ever attempted was 12 hours in one day, and it was with 4 kids in the car.
Oh, where'd you drive to?
I had to make a return trip from Florida as one of the hurricanes rolled in last year, and it was going to split the path home pretty even. So we just hauled it all in one day.
Okay. Well, right on.
Never again.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Longest drive I've ever done would either be when I drove to Boulder, Colorado, or Shreveport, Louisiana. I'm not sure which one is further. I want to say Shreveport because I actually had to drive through Texas to get to Shreveport, and Texas is really big state to drive through. So that's probably the longest I've driven is to Shreveport, Louisiana, and back.
Yeah, I'm hoping as the kids get older, it'll be easier to take those long car rides. At least you can get in a lot of good audiobooks or podcasts or all that stuff.
That's true. I don't really do the whole audiobook thing though. I just don't retain it if it's spoken to me. I have to actually read it with the book in front of me. So I usually just take music with me on my phone.
Well, that's good too. I switch back and forth between all three depending on where my brain is in the moment. Yeah,
no doubt. Actually, I did take some podcasts with me too, so I did listen to some podcasts on the way back.
Cool. Sounds like a good trip then.
Yeah, I enjoy road trips.
Yeah,
gives me a lot of time with my own thoughts, basically, just while I'm on the road. And a lot of thinking done.
That can be really beneficial, I find. I don't get kind of that uninterrupted time usually unless I'm on the road, and I can really just think, which is nice.
Yeah.
So, as listeners can tell, we're really informal tonight with our discussion. So, but we're here for more Mentionables apologetic theater. Tonight, we are going to finish up our First Contact trilogy. I guess it's not going to become a quadrilogy because I don't know of another good one we could tack onto it.
Well, there's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Or Independence Day. There's a few out there, but
one that was interesting had some interesting theological implications, especially if you follow the whole thing that aliens could actually be demons and that kind of line of thought was Fourth Kind. A lot of people hated this movie, but I found it really interesting. It was specifically about like abduction encounters and stuff, and it definitely paralleled kind of possession, demonic type stuff as well. It was an interesting flick.
You remember what it was called?
The Fourth Kind.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, I actually do have a science fiction book written by a Christian author. It's called Nephilim, but he approaches it from the position that the Nephilim were space aliens.
Yeah.
And so,
interesting.
I do remember it being a pretty good read. I mean, I don't remember anything about it except that I think the I think the lead character is like a journalist or writes for a newspaper or something, and that's why he's investigating these alien sightings. But yeah, that was so I remember it being actually a pretty easy read. It was just I thought it was pretty well written.
Cool. I might have to check that one out. Another one that I recall that was a really interesting book. I haven't finished the second one in the series, but Michael Heiser actually put out a book along the same kind of lines. It was people getting involved with the government and getting called in for this revelation to people that aliens were real, but there was definitely something like more sinister kind of going on as well. And I think it was going to have some parallels that these whatever beings they're dealing with maybe weren't exactly aliens, but something more along the Nephilim kind of demonic realm. It was called The Facade.
Oh,
it was another pretty good book. So, and there's a sequel out to that one too. But
okay, we've only read the first one.
Yeah, only read the first one. Started the second one, just haven't gotten too far into it yet.
Okay.
So
yeah, I actually read the first book in a 3-book series. It's not really about aliens or about first contact or anything like that, but it's actually about the colonization of Mars and like the first people to go and colonize it. And it's written by an author named Kim Stanley Robinson. It starts off with Red Mars, then Green Mars, and Blue Mars. And it's just about this expedition of astronauts who are going to colonize Mars. I read the first book. Never really got around to reading the last two. But yeah. I thought the first one was pretty interesting. And it was, written as a hard sci-fi book, one that's more geared toward, the reality of space instead of fantastical books about, alien civilizations and things like that.
Yeah, I had another one kind of along those lines back in college. Last book we'll mention for tonight, I promise. But there was one called The Sparrow that I remember doing back in college, and it was about a Jesuit priest that went on this mission to meet with these aliens and stuff. And then it got really, really awful stuff happened. So I'm not sure if it was more horror or more sci-fi, somewhere in between, and really disturbing and really kind of, it did have some interesting theological applications, though.
Right. I mean, it's probably a sci-fi horror.
Right.
Like they have movies like that, like Alien or I'm blanking on the name of it, Dark Horizon or something like that.
Yeah.
Or
Event Horizon. Yeah.
Event Horizon. Yeah, that's the one, right? Yeah. So it could have just probably been a sci-fi horror film or book.
Yeah, it was interesting. This one definitely had some dark turns in it. So
right.
But tonight we are going to be dealing with the 1997 movie Contact.
Yeah.
So this is our film for tonight. This is going to wrap up our kind of First Contact trilogy. We, of course, kicked this off back with the film Arrival. Had a good discussion there. And then last week, me and Joel took on a conversation about the film Paul.
How was Paul, by the way? I didn't get a chance to see it.
It was dreadful.
Oh, was it?
It was really horrible. I see why Joel liked the parts he did. When it came to deconversion and how.
What did Joel think of the movie? Like overall?
He didn't seem to like it either, and he seemed to actually enjoy the fact that he made me watch this movie.
Okay, that kind of surprises me because it was written by a pretty well-known comedic actor, right?
Yeah, and it was written by Simon Pegg.
Right?
And Nick Frost.
Okay, yeah, because I've seen a few movies that he's been in. There's that trilogy of movies that he did, where you have World's End, Shaun of the Dead, and Hot Fuzz.
Yep.
Which I've only seen Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. I haven't seen World's End yet, but that's definitely on my radar. And I saw another movie he did called Absolutely Anything, which I thought was okay. Wasn't a great comedy, but
in general, I really enjoy his movies. This one
Yeah.
just did nothing for me. And then, of course, Seth Rogen being the voice of the main alien was like,
Oh,
that's when it just
he was the voice of Paul?
crashed for me. Yeah. It's
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
couldn't buy into it.
Yeah, for someone like that, it seems like you should probably cast like an unknown actor, or at least someone who doesn't have such a recognizable voice as Seth Rogen.
Right. That would have definitely helped. But this movie was so bad that there wasn't a whole lot that could save it.
Yeah.
So,
well, I could mention one more book because I happened to find this. I happened to find this while I was in New Mexico last week. The book Contact by Carl Sagan, which the movie, of course, was based on, and that's actually what gave me the idea to do Contact for it tonight, because I'd seen it many years ago. I don't even remember how many years ago I saw it. It was on Netflix, and I managed to catch it, and I thought it was pretty good. And so, yeah, my first recommendation was shot down because it's not the most fast-paced movie, but Contact, I thought actually turned out to be a pretty good suggestion. I watched it again today, and yeah, I thought it was still pretty good. Still a really good movie.
Yeah, last time I saw this was probably right around 1997. So I was about my oldest son's age.
So close to when it came out.
Yeah, it was like right after it came on video, and I wasn't, at 11 or 12 years old, it just went right over my head.
Yeah.
So watching it again, it was like watching it fresh, because I didn't remember any of the major themes.
Yeah, and as this is an apologetics podcast, Carl Sagan, of course, is a name that's very familiar to apologists, because a lot of the things that the modern new atheists take for granted came from Carl Sagan. Things like, they quote Carl Sagan when they say the universe is all that is, all that ever was, or all that ever will be. I may have butchered that quote, but that's a quote from Carl Sagan. What's that?
I think that's pretty close.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that, and that's a quote from Carl Sagan from I think his show, Cosmos.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah, I believe that's where the quote comes from. So yeah, Carl Sagan is definitely well known to apologists. So I thought maybe checking out the movie, and I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know how closely the movie mirrors the book. So all I can really talk about is the movie for now. I do intend to read the book because I wanted to see how closely the movie resembles the book, because the movie has a lot of themes regarding religion which seem a lot more positive than I would have expected from Carl Sagan. So I'm interested to see if that actually came from Carl Sagan or if that was adjusted for the movie.
Yeah, that kind of caught me off guard as well, is the fact that going in knowing that Carl Sagan was behind the story, at least for this, and then to see how things kind of turned out. We won't get into spoilers just yet, but it definitely caught me off guard.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and dive in. I'll throw up our spoiler warning once we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it. But let's kind of dive in and give the listeners the first half of the movie as to kind of what's going on up to the point of contact, if you will.
Yeah. Did you want me to go ahead and give the synopsis, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So, essentially Jodie Foster plays the lead character of this film, a woman named Eleanor. Forget her last name, but Eleanor is her name in the movie. And essentially the movie starts off, and by the way, if you're going to watch the film, don't wear headphones and keep it turned up to full blast when you start the movie. Just word of warning to the wise.
Unless you have no interest in keeping your eardrums.
Right, yeah, because I watch it on Vudu on my laptop, and it starts off with complete silence, and then it just kind of kicks in. I won't say anything more than that, but essentially Jodie Foster plays a woman, and the movie actually starts off with her as a child, and establishes that her father really took an interest in Eleanor's intellectual development, and so taught her astronomy, because that's something that she kind of really seemed to take an aptitude to as a child. And so now as an adult, both of Eleanor's parents had died, and she was was now a scientist. He had graduated from college with a degree and was actually a very promising scientist, but wanted to basically dedicate her life to defining signals from extraterrestrials. And so the film then is much of the conflict of the first hour and a half or so is about her trying to get the funding, and then when she gets the funding, trying to find the signal, and all of the events kind of leading up to when she finally finds something, and then well, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say really much more without really getting into spoilers. But essentially, that the film is just her as a scientist trying to look for signs of intelligent alien life on other planets. That's essentially the plot. But there's more we could say once we actually talk about spoilers. So
yeah, so the warning's up there now because I think we're going to be getting deeper. One of the interesting things I found about early on in the movie is just how it really works at developing some of these themes that kind of carry through the movie. Her talking about, well, can't we reach my mom? Her mom died at a young age. So,
right.
Talking about these kind of concepts of afterlife and the vastness of the universe. Although I will say that first shot of the movie, where it zooms out. Wow. I mean,
yeah,
even with the special effects in 97, this was just
right.
one of those scenes that's just like, wow, that's an awesome sequence.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the visuals were absolutely spectacular. They're stunning, even throughout the movie. Like when she, when she finds this device, manages to go into space and sees all the what she called cosmic. What was it? Cosmic. Not cosmic encounters, but like cosmic phenomena or whatever the term was she used, and really, really good looking. I thought it was a really nice touch too, that as the camera was panning away from Earth, the radio signals you were hearing from Earth started to go back in time because of the further away from Earth you got, the less and less recent the signals would have been that you would have heard. So that was a nice little nod to actual science, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was awesome. After seeing that, I'm like, okay, I can really sit down and enjoy this movie.
Yeah, and I'm pretty critical to a lot of faith-based movies, because a lot of the faith-based movie makers don't really know how to make good films, and they tend to put the message first, and then any artistry they want to incorporate, second or third after the message. I was noticing a few of the storytelling techniques that they were using in Contact, which I thought would really make a good film for faith-based movie makers to watch, in order to kind of see, because movies are a visual medium. You show, you don't tell. But then you have movies which basically just say everything that's happening on the screen, and that's just not the way to make a good movie. And they had little little touches, like when she was introduced to the guy who was blind. Like, she didn't say, "Oh, you're blind, sorry about that," but she extended her hand, and the blind guy extended it like a few inches away, causing her to realize, oh, he can't see. So just that, just little touches like that gave you information that they didn't actually have to say. And I thought that was a really I think that's a really great thing that we can watch if you're interested in making movies, to kind of see how to show, not tell, when you make a movie.
Yeah, it definitely had all those kind of elements, and it just pulled you into the character stories, because it was like that. It felt very real.
Right.
Like you said, it wasn't anything at all like what you would see in a typical faith-based movie. We'll have to bring a few of those on at some point and put ourselves through that. So,
right.
No offense. I mean, I'm sure the intention is usually very, very good on making a bunch of these movies.
Yeah, and I've seen a couple of faith-based movies that I actually like quite a bit, that were made really well. So, but for the most part, you have people who haven't gone through film school who want to make a movie, because they have a passion for it. So yeah, I think watching movies like this would be a great way to kind of see how to present information on the screen without actually having to have one of your characters speak it.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is just a phenomenal example of how you can tackle really big philosophical and theological issues in a movie while still telling an interesting story, as opposed to something like when Hollywood took on Left Behind, not the Kirk Cameron version,
Oh, the
but
Nicolas Cage
the
version,
Nicolas Cage version.
which I
So,
have not seen. I've seen the Kirk Cameron one. I haven't seen the Nicolas Cage one.
okay, we're going to have to do that because essentially taking the premises of the one, throwing it into a Hollywood budget, and then raking the faith-based elements over the coals,
Right.
and then throwing Nicolas Cage in on top of it.
Right.
By far, one of the top 3 worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
I laughed through the entire thing. It was
Did you ever
bad. It was funny.
Did you ever see the movie Knowing?
Knowing, I did see that one.
Yeah, that was another Nicolas Cage film about the end of the world, essentially apocalypse. And I had no interest in seeing it. I went because a friend wanted to go see it, and that one, yeah, that one wasn't great either. But yeah, it's Nicolas Cage. So.
And that one looks like Oscar material compared to Left Behind. So
right, yeah, yeah, and so so a big theme of Contact is science versus faith. And so Jodie Foster meets up with a character played by Matthew McConaughey named Palmer, and yeah, he graduated college with a divinity degree, but decided that the priesthood wasn't for him because, as he said, he couldn't deal with all the celibacy. So so he basically presents himself as a man of the cloth without the cloth, and so he presents the religious aspect, whereas Jodie Foster presents the science-based aspect of it. And so, yeah, I don't know what's more unrealistic: the finding intelligent life, or the fact that Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey can discuss religion without beating each other up.
I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was the 90s. In modern day. I don't. It'd be difficult difficult for some people to have a romantic relationship with someone who didn't share their religious views.
Right. And I think that kind of tension of not just the relationship, but it parallels this bigger kind of tension between what it's trying to portray as kind of science versus religion for a good part of the movie as well. Yeah. I thought it was interesting. You have that individual tension between them, and then you also have that big picture tension. Made it really, really interesting.
Right. And so, Palmer is trying to have this discussion with she goes by Eleanor. Palmer's trying to have this discussion with Eleanor, and he graduated with a divinity degree, but the arguments that Palmer actually makes in the movie, aren't the best apologetic arguments for God's existence. He makes a few good points, like when Ellie asked Palmer how he can know, if he could prove to her that God exists, and then he responds with, well, do you believe that, or did you love your father? Well, could you prove that to me? And yeah, I mean, she probably couldn't prove that to Palmer. So
I've actually got that clip. I believe that's the clip that we'll play. So yeah, just to keep people up to date. So after they finally discover this signal, it of course becomes a very big deal, as it would, and all of a sudden everybody's getting pulled into government meetings and meeting with the president, and this occurs when these two characters by chance meet again, as they're both involved with one of the president's committees. So this is kind of where this meeting happens, and this discussion goes down.
Yeah, President Clinton does show up in the movie, but it's through stock footage. So
it was clever, though. It was definitely clever.
Yeah, you can kind of tell that it was stock footage, though. Because I saw President Clinton, I'm like, oh wow, did they actually get him, or is this stock footage? And then everything he said was vague enough that it could pertain to the movie, but not specific to where some of the things you would expect him to say. So I was thinking, okay, that's probably stock footage. And then I read through the end credits, and okay, yeah, they used stock footage through some of the movies. So yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was okay. I'm curious. I was looking this up to see if this was before or after Forrest Gump. It was after Forrest Gump, so they probably borrowed the idea from there.
Oh,
I'm not sure if there were a ton that used kind of stock footage before that, but of course, Forrest Gump did a really good job
yeah.
with integrating that stock footage. So,
Right. Well, yeah, another film I can think of that came later was Kung Pao Enter the Fist,
yeah,
which is one of my all-time favorite comedies. I haven't seen it in a while because I actually don't own it on video, but that's a really, really great comedy.
yeah, I haven't seen it since it was in theaters, but
Yeah.
I remember enjoying it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's play this clip here. It's about a 2-3 minute clip. A warning to listeners. I think the language is all clean in this, but if you want to preview before your kids watch, if they're watching with you, that might be a good idea.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of salty language in the film. I remember one or two instances, but yeah.
Yeah, not a whole lot.
Right.
All righty. So
I read your book.
Here we go.
Would you like me to quote you? Ironically, the thing that people are the most hungry for, meaning, is the one thing that science hasn't been able to give them.
Yeah.
Come on. It's like you're saying that science killed God. What if science simply revealed that he never existed in the first place?
I think we're gonna need to get some air.
What?
And a few more of these.
Thank you. Whew. A little chilly out here.
Yeah, this is nice.
I got one for you.
What do you got?
Occam's razor. You've ever heard of it?
Occam's razor. Sounds like some slasher movie.
No, Occam's razor. It's a basic scientific principle. And it says, all things being equal, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one.
Makes sense to me.
So what's more likely? Thank you.
You're welcome.
An all-powerful, mysterious God created the universe and then decided not to give any proof of his existence. Or that he simply doesn't exist at all, and that we created him so we wouldn't have to feel so small and alone.
I don't know. I couldn't imagine living in a world where God didn't exist, I wouldn't want to.
How do you know you're not deluding yourself? I mean, for me, I need proof.
Proof. Did you love your father?
What?
Your dad, did you love him?
Yes, very much.
Prove it.
Folks, what you're looking at here will probably go down as the biggest stock market.
No, it won't. All right.
I mean, we could just watch the movie and commentate on it.
Yeah, I know. That would not necessarily be a bad way of going about this. So, yeah. So that was a fun clip.
Yeah, and so, I think, for someone who graduated with a divinity degree, Palmer could be someone who could probably make a better case for God's existence than just saying, well, you can't prove that you loved your father, which is true, of course, but we can make, I think when someone like Jodie Foster says that God didn't leave any evidence of his existence, I think there's a lot of evidence we could point to that God left, not even intentionally, but just by virtue of creating.
Right. And, his absolute kind of deadpan shock when, she asked for proof is not necessarily something you would expect from someone with a divinity degree hitting up the president's, well, maybe hitting up the president's, religious council.
Right.
So, honestly, I held out hope there for a fraction of a second when he asked her if she loved her father, if he would actually go into some kind of argument from kind of the nature of love.
Yeah, I think they were really just trying to leave the question ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Like they wanted to have both sides make some good points, and then not argue too heavily on one side or the other. because the whole movie really is about ambiguity, even considering the end of the film, where where Eleanor is left wondering if she really did have an encounter with aliens. And so, just to kind of jump to the end here, since we're talking about spoilers, in one of the broadcasts that the aliens left for Earth, they included the plans to construct this device, which would be able to send someone from Earth to essentially their planet to encounter one of the aliens. And so, Eleanor, brings all this to the president. They end up constructing this machine, and then she eventually ends up going, which is a really, really great effects laden sequence, but really, really good looking special effects sequence. But essentially, when she returns from encountering one of these aliens who appears to her like her father, and the planet appears to her like Earth, because they figure it would be easier for her this way, since it's her first encounter with these aliens. But when she returns, it turns out that for everybody else, no time had passed. And so when her pod was dropped into essentially what is a wormhole or a vortex, her ship ended up just kind of plummeting right through the device down into the water. And so everyone else experienced that instantaneously, whereas she had this 18-hour experience with the space aliens. And so nobody except for her and later Palmer believes that she actually had this encounter with aliens, because to everyone else, it seems like no time had passed, that her ship just kind of dropped right through the device and didn't go anywhere. Although there was some evidence that she had this encounter, because she took a video recorder with her. But when she got back, the video recorder just showed static, but it had 18 hours of recorded static on it. So there's some evidence that shows that maybe she did, but everyone else kind of believes that she didn't have this experience, and that she was actually kind of manipulated by this rich entrepreneur who actually lives on the Mir space station. So the ending kind of leaves you a little bit ambiguous too. Did she really meet the alien? Did she not? Was it all a delusion? That kind of thing. And so now she has this experience, and now she kind of has this common ground with Palmer, that she had this experience with the alien that she can't explain, that she can't get anybody else to believe, because she has no proof or residual evidence from her encounter, which of course she had the 18 hours of static, which I would say is evidence for her encounter. But they're kind of using it as this parallel for God, that you might not be able to prove it to anybody else, but you could have this personal experience which proves it for you. And that's kind of where Eleanor is left at the end of the movie, kind of wondering. She believes in her heart that she had this experience for real, but she has no way of really proving it to anybody else.
Yeah, and that's where some of the pieces that have stayed with me after the movie kind of came from, is a lot of these chunks from the ending, because you've, on the one hand, you've got this plot hole about why would the government have this 18 hours of footage or of static that kind of at least supports her story, that they then just kind of put over here and cover it up. But then again, given the narrative the government's trying to spin at the time, it's not completely out of the question. But it did leave a lot of kind of hanging questions there about it, and I thought it was interesting that a lot of the parallels with this alien encounter too, I think you could very easily parallel it to what we see with kind of NDEs, near-death experiences,
Right.
and that sort of thing. So it would make sense for people to write it off as kind of a hallucination, because it's kind of this near-death experience type thing, in terms of seeing it in the form of her dead father. But it also drew a kind of a connection between making it a borderline spiritual experience versus just something that was strictly naturalistic. I suspect that if there's anything greatly changed about this from the book, I would suspect the ending may be a little different. But again, I don't know for sure, and I don't want to look it up and spoil the book for you.
Okay, thanks. And you saw in the movie clip that Jodie Foster's character Eleanor brought up Occam's razor to Palmer, and at the end of the film, one of the representatives of the government, played by James Woods, actually does the same thing to her. It brings up Occam's razor and says, "Now, which is more likely, that you had this delusion, that you didn't really see the space aliens, or that you actually took this trip where you have no evidence that you actually took it?" And so that's another parallel to where Jodie Foster was with Matthew McConaughey earlier in the film, talking to him about Occam's razor and how she believes that shows that God doesn't exist, because it's the simpler explanation is that there is no God. But now it's also worth pointing out that I think they're actually misusing Occam's razor in the film. That there's kind of this common misconception that Occam's razor says that that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Occam's razor, I believe, actually states that one should not multiply entities beyond necessity, which is a much different claim, and one that I think is a lot easier to justify. And it also, because, a lot of times the more complicated thing really is the correct thing. And so if you're going to just use Occam's razor as this idea that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, well, that's not really going to help you find a whole lot of truth, because a lot of times truth is more complicated than the simpler explanations.
That's a good point. And I think, how we see it used in this movie is actually kind of the most common usage there is. You're absolutely right, though, about kind of and yes, it does boil down to, is this a simpler explanation because you have less ad hocness to something? But it's still an important distinction. But I thought the way it was largely used, I mean, granted, you're talking about, a court case of some kind, a trial, where they're assessing it towards the end. You'd think they'd be a little more precise in language, but
especially if it's a movie about science.
Right, exactly. Considering all their accuracies in the view of the universe and kind of all these the wormhole stuff as well, was also in line with a lot of the theories in terms of what we know about holes in space-time, with black holes kind of doing exactly this and even bending space-time in that way. Right. So yeah, that's a good point, though. Although I did find the conversation that we watched where they were talking about it to be kind of the same way you would hear it used in a typical conversation. At least among, people giving it a discussion who, are doing it on kind of a personal level versus a more academic approach to it.
Right.
Where did my notes go here? I had a note about some of the quotes in this movie that I thought were really good. I probably took more notes for this movie than most of the ones I have.
Well, if you're the kind of person who likes a lot of action in their movies, you probably won't enjoy Contact. But if you're someone who likes thoughtful science fiction and doesn't mind slower moving pace for the plot, I think you'll really get a lot out of Contact.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of made the difference for me now and what I thought of the movie versus when I was a kid seeing this.
Right. Yeah, now that you're actually doing apologetics, it probably has a lot more meaning for you.
Yes, yeah, that, and as a kid, you just want to see the aliens. Where are the aliens? And then, it's kind of a disappointment if that's what you're looking forward to.
Right. Yeah, because I'm kind of the same way when it comes to monster movies, like kaiju movies, Godzilla, King Kong, movies like that. Like, I go to see the monster, and I want to see the monster fight other monsters. So the first Godzilla movie, the one with Bryan Cranston in it, the movie was a good movie because it had the characters. Well, I guess sort of a good movie because Bryan Cranston was only in like the first part of it, and he was the best part of the movie. But with a movie like that,
usually
there wasn't enough monster action for me to really enjoy the movie. So when it comes to like a kaiju monster movie, I want to see the monster. But when it comes to a science fiction movie, if it's a more thoughtful film, I can put aside my need and desire to kind of see those things because it services the plot. In this case, you could be disappointed that you don't actually see the aliens. You don't see much of their civilization. There's only one alien in the film that appears to Eleanor as her deceased father. All these things can be disappointing to you, but these things make sense in the context of the film, and they help service the plot. So so in that respect, I can overlook those things. I don't really need them because of how the plot unfolds, essentially.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I felt the same way about it. I was engaged enough in each kind of dialogue along the way too. That it really, I thought the pacing was pretty good. It didn't feel like a 2-hour, 20-minute movie. Just because it was really well paced. There was always something happening, and there really wasn't kind of any, dead air that didn't kind of need to be there. It was all important to the story.
Yeah, and they help establish the motivations of the characters. So, nothing really got boring because the whole thing Eleanor was trying to do was already set up in the beginning of the film. So you understood her motivations and you wanted to see her succeed, Even if you're religious, and they're having this big meeting with these world leaders about who should go up into space. When Palmer asks Eleanor if she believes in God, which gets her basically gets her removed from consideration for going into outer space. You get upset by that because you've spent time with Eleanor and you realize that she wasn't really kicked off for a fair reason. Of course, later Palmer explains why he did what he did, but you kind of from the beginning of the movie you already connect with Eleanor because they've already clearly established her motivations and they've built her character up, and so you want to see her succeed as the film goes on.
And I wish we had really kept this around, because just in terms of the aspect of something this movie had that a lot of modern movies with a main female lead are kind of missing. Like when you take a look at something like Captain Marvel, you have this perfect heroine.
Don't get me started on Captain Marvel.
Yeah. And this had a realistic, believable, strong, engaging female lead.
Yeah.
And you could relate to this character and you could understand what she was going through. She was experiencing realistic sexism at times, as well as, a realistic, even persecution. I use that word extremely lightly. But for her atheistic beliefs, you could even see that, there was certainly some very realistic challenges there. And she struggled with her beliefs and how to answer things as well. So it was realistic struggles. It was a realistic character.
Yeah. So the thing about Captain Marvel was that it's a woke film, and because it's a woke film, like the Ghostbusters film from 2016 or Ocean's 8 or Charlie's Angels or any of these all female led films, especially the ones where they were originally led by men. The thing is that the films are just bad. And they use the excuse that nerds don't want to see movies with a strong female lead, which of course is complete baloney, because we have Alien with Sigourney Weaver, we have Contact, we have Annihilation, which is a science fiction film that came out a couple years ago, which had an all female lead. We have numerous films with a female lead. What we want is a good movie, and Captain Marvel is aside. It was a passable film because it was MCU, and they never really made a bad film since the MCU began, but they really had a lot of bad will with Captain Marvel right from the start, because Captain Marvel was shoehorned in. They had two females in the MCU already that would have made a great solo film for the first female lead. They had Scarlet Witch, who was introduced in Avengers Age of Ultron, she would have been a great choice. And she got a really great moment in Avengers Endgame too with her arc. But the real one they should have started with was Black Widow. She had been with the MCU almost from the very beginning. And so she would have been a great choice for the first female-led film. But instead of doing what would have made sense, they kind of shoehorned in Captain Marvel into the MCU in order to have this film. So that was really... so they really had bad will in the movie right from the start. Regarding Captain Marvel. So that was just kind of a misstep in my view from the MCU. But yeah, so talking about something like Captain Marvel is that she's going into an already established universe. And so by shoehorning her in, they established bad will from the fans. A movie like Contact doesn't have an already established universe to bring the film into. So there really isn't that bad will. You kind of start off from a neutral slate. Is this movie going to be good? Let's watch and find out. And it ends up being a really good science fiction film. So I think that's one of the main advantages it had over Captain Marvel just right from the very beginning.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right. You've got a structural disadvantage, and then when you just do character writing that just doesn't make a character relatable, on top of it,
yeah,
that's another problem. So,
right.
But that aside, I think Contact was really great in a lot of ways, and it was definitely one I'll watch again here in a few years.
Yeah.
So to dive in a little bit more into some of these kind of science and faith aspects that are kind of intertwined in this film. There were a couple moments that really stood out to me, more than a couple, but there were a few things that I thought were really interesting, and they kind of go down a range of apologetics related issues. So I'm gonna go through a couple of these, and if one catches your attention, just grab on. We'll talk about it a little bit more.
Okay.
So we've already talked a little bit about the conflict between faith and science. Let's see here. There is an interesting concept in Palmer's book as well about, and this was another theme that kind of ran throughout, is the world a better place because of science and technology? And his book largely had to do with the search for meaning. And have we lost our sense of direction because we're so focused on science? And of course, I think that tied in really, really well to the end of the movie, because you see this kind of reclaiming of meaning from these aliens. And, another kind of side note, I'm going off on a bunch of different paths here, but last week we talked some with Paul about the problem of aliens. So is aliens period a problem for the Christian worldview? If aliens exist, doesn't that mean God doesn't exist? And I thought this dealt with it in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I mean that's a question I hear come up occasionally. I mean, C.S. Lewis even wrote an essay on space aliens and what it would mean for Christianity if we found evidence that there's intelligent life on other planets. And really, it seems to me that the odds against naturalistic evolution evolving one race, namely ours, are so astronomical that if we were to discover a race of intelligent aliens on another planet, I would think that would actually be evidence for at least a theistic religion, not and against atheism. So I would think that because of the odds against evolution happening naturally, I would think that would be evidence for Christianity, or at least the theistic religion more generally. So yeah, I don't think I don't believe there are aliens on other planets. In fact, yeah, one of the things that was actually repeated 3 or 4 times throughout the film is that if there are no aliens on other planets, that would be a huge waste of space. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, because it seems, at least on the surface, to make sense that we have this huge universe, 13.7 billion light years across. Seems reasonable to assume that there would be life on other planets. But, I think there's reason to be skeptical of that. That, number one, a painter doesn't have to necessarily paint on a huge canvas. He could paint on something a lot smaller. But the reason that he paints on something so big is, if he wants to, he wants to express himself artistically, and so he does it on a bigger canvas. And so he doesn't necessarily need to use something that big, but he does to express himself artistically. So even if there are no intelligent aliens on other planets, it seems like God might still create a huge universe just because he's a creative God, and he wants to let his artistic bent flow throughout the universe. And in fact, there was a book later made into a documentary called The Privileged Planet, written by Guillermo something. I forget his last name, but and I think one other guy kind of co-wrote it. But I could probably look it up later. But yeah, essentially, one of the points they make in that is that there are a lot of reasons to suspect intelligent design, and one of those is that our placement in the galaxy, it seems like just on the surface, our placement is just random. Because we're like in one of the spiral arms of our galaxy, and we're not like at the center of it. We're not anywhere, taking like a place of dominance or anything like that. But we're actually placed in the spot that actually makes it possible for us to see the grandeur of the universe. That if we were in any other place, that there would be nebulae in our way, or things that wouldn't allow us to really have a good view of the rest of the universe. And so the placement of the Earth is actually such that it allows us to investigate the cosmos that God has created. So I think that there could be any number of reasons why God would create such a big universe if he only wanted to populate one planet with intelligent beings.
Yeah, and one thing they use in the movie that they bring up at one point, and I've heard this brought up in conversation as well, is Drake's equation, which is essentially a probabilistic equation based on, well, we can estimate, use that very hesitantly here,
Right.
we can estimate the number of planets that are within a habitable zone of a sun. We can estimate the number of universes that have habitable zones. We can estimate the number of suns that may have a planet with a habitable zone, on and on and on. And adding these probabilities together until you get to a point where, you can say, well, there must be at least 10 million other planets that have a chance for evolutionary life development. One of the problems with Drake's equation is the fact that these are barely even estimates. It's guesses. To calculate any of these things, when looking at the number of habitable planets, the number of habitable universes, there's so much that goes into that just having any of these percentages off a little bit could sink the whole equation. So one, it's that kind of thing. And then you look at, the problem of abiogenesis on top of that. If life did naturally develop in some way, shape, or form, you're looking at a probability of that somewhere in 1 times 10 to the 48th power. And that alone is so close to zero that even if you were to say we've got these other probabilities of this many planets, et cetera, the probability of life developing there is also extremely, extremely low. I mean, it would be considered zero chance, or essentially zero, because it is so far out. I'm sorry, I think I said 1 in 10 to the 48th, 1 in 10 to the negative 48th, I think it is. So anyway, there's some problems with Drake's equation as well, and it was interestingly used as kind of a plot device, but as an argument for there being other life out there, I don't find it compelling. And I'm someone who really loves kind of probabilistic arguments. And it's so much of a guesstimate on every single factor in it.
Yeah,
that it's really hard to take seriously.
Yeah, because it's really, really difficult to estimate how many planets there would be with the possibility of life. Because it's not like we can just peer over into the next galaxy. Now, there are ways that they can determine that there are planets around other stars. They watch the star. If they see the star dims, they know there's a planet orbiting it. And how much the planet dims or the star dims, they can kind of estimate that planet's orbit around the sun. So certain things like that, they can actually kind of estimate how many planets there are. But it becomes a lot more difficult, especially with how many stars there are, to really estimate how many planets there would be with the possibility of supporting life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll even say the same thing to a certain extent for biogenesis, in that we're using a probabilistic argument to look at that. We can run computer simulations on that. Given what we know about population sizes for evolutionary changes. So we at least have something to use for that. But again, still, we're looking at numbers that are fairly uncertain. So
right,
you're taking a guess at it. I mean, it's not much better than saying, well, there's a 50-50 chance that we either have life or we don't.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Right. I did find it interesting, though, how they kind of addressed the God issue to a certain extent and kind of took it off the table. They actually kind of provided an answer to that question when she's having the conversation with the alien at the end. And, they're expressing that there was a civilization prior to them, and it's how they got this machine that they transported her there in. And an indication of, belief systems and ways of doing things for billions of years already. So it kind of does the same thing it typically does if you just use, aliens, therefore no God, is it just pushes the problem back a step further.
Yeah, because where did those aliens come from?
Exactly. You've still got the same problems for origin of the universe and origins of life.
Yeah.
What did you think? Another element that came up as kind of a subplot along the way is what did you think of this this cult leader in the movie?
Oh,
I thought it was kind of a weird element to have in there, but of course, came into play importantly later in the movie.
Yeah. Contact is a great movie. I don't think it's a perfect movie necessarily. He was a religious extremist, and obviously there will always be religious extremists. I kind of felt like that whole subplot there was just added in for some manufactured drama. Because again, we're dealing with spoilers here. Because the extremists, Eleanor doesn't get selected to go into space. Her boss essentially gets selected. The extremist, doesn't want them to go into space, so he ends up blowing up the first machine they built, including the boss who was supposed to go into space. And then it's revealed that the rich guy who lives on the Mir space station just had two built, and so there's a second one that she can now go up into space. I kind of felt like that was a little convenient, and I thought the whole plot point about the guy blowing up the station, the religious extremist, was just kind of in there to manufacture some additional drama. I didn't really feel like it was necessary for the plot, especially with the whole thing they were trying to investigate.
Right. Yeah. I think watching it from a modern day perspective, it's one of those things that it's probably going to remind a lot of people of the atheist meme that went around a few years ago, that essentially said, science flies you to the moon, religion flies you into skyscrapers.
Yeah, which is a really, really dumb meme. I mean,
right.
a Catholic priest discovered the Big Bang. A Catholic was the second person to step on the moon. Buzz Aldrin actually took communion on the moon, which is something you wouldn't learn in elementary school. So this whole that's just a really dumb meme. I have seen it, and it gets a face palm from me every time.
Yeah, I agree, and it was kind of this scene in the movie when where the cult leader blows stuff up that did remind me of this meme, though, and at least the movie presents kind of both sides of things. While this is there as kind of a subplot, you're also seeing some value in religion as well. Like we talked about at the beginning, it definitely presents a more positive side than I kind of expected going into it.
Right.
But it was interesting they had this subplot too, though, with this religious extremist and going to such measures to stop things. And
going back to the going back to that atheist meme for a moment, science actually gave us the A-bomb.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's true.
Right. So yeah, that just occurred to me.
We could flip that meme entirely on its head.
Right. Yeah.
Another thing I liked was kind of the overall positive message of the movie. It was definitely more uplifting than a lot of your depressing movies these days.
Right.
There were some quotes about, the only thing that makes emptiness bearable is one another, which is an interesting answer to some of the atheistic problems of meaning. It certainly steered clear of nihilism, as a lot of movies kind of lean towards and into today. Right. So that was interesting. And again, like we were talking about at the ending, the fact that the goal at the end, one of the lines I think of McConaughey's character is, the goal on both sides, whether it's science or religion, is the pursuit of truth. I thought that comment and line was just fantastic, because I think if you're sincere on either side, and we saw in the movie that there were people who were unsincere about science and those who were unsincere about religion. And yet you see in our two main characters, you see that there can be sincerity to both, and they're not necessarily in conflict with each other all the time.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know, maybe there was a purpose, like a bigger purpose for the religious extremists, to show that whether you're involved in science or you're involved in religion, both can be misused as well as being used for a good purpose, like seeking truth.
Yeah, and I mean, you see the same challenge with science early in the movie when she's struggling with funding and they keep getting shut down and all that. It's certainly a different level than blowing something up, but it's still halting progress.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it can affect her livelihood too, because she had the plug pulled on her entire program.
That's true.
But, her boss thought that he was doing the best thing for her, but it wasn't really his decision to make. It was her decision to make, because he felt that she was pursuing a pipe dream, essentially, and ruining any chance she would ever have of becoming a good scientist.
Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, I think that whole element was rather interesting.
Yeah.
And for me, there was one other kind of apologetic element that came into play in this movie towards the end. And I think it's really interesting, and it's something we have to consider when looking at things, is that changed lives can very much be proof, in a sense. Now, that doesn't mean in every scenario. So, someone who turns around and comes in and says, meditation has changed my life because, I used to be homeless and now I'm not. Well, what other factors were in there? What else has went on? So it certainly doesn't exclude evidence, but changed life can be a very powerful factor in looking at things, particularly when you're looking at firsthand accounts and you don't have a lot of other resources to go to in terms of looking at things historically. So, Foster's character here reflects this complete change, I think, in terms of all of a sudden being open to so much more than she was before. I think the experience was somewhat spiritual in a way for her. At least that was the impression I got, is that there was this change in her in terms of how she looked at things, and she wouldn't back down from her story. Even though she admitted the possibility that she was hallucinating,
Right.
It still fundamentally changed her in a way. So I think there's something very compelling to be said that changed lives are definitely important to consider when looking at evidence for a given set of events.
Yeah.
But those were some of my main takeaways. I know that was all over the place, but
No, yeah, I thought those were good thoughts.
well, before we wrap up, any other things we missed that you wanted to discuss about the movie, or any final thoughts on it?
Yeah, I thought we covered it pretty well. Like I said, again, I'm planning on reading the book, so I'm really interested to see what changes they made from the movie, from the book, and because I considering the original book was written by Carl Sagan, who did not write the screenplay for the movie. I would imagine. I don't know if do you remember when Carl Sagan died?
I'm trying to think. I think they announced it at the end of this movie, wasn't it?
Because they
1988.
they dedicated it to Carl Sagan.
Right.
I don't remember them.
Let me see here.
I wonder if he was still alive when the movie was made. The dedication.
No, he died. He died right before this. Actually, he died in December of 1996. So probably like 5 or 6 months before this movie was released.
Okay, so probably in the middle of filming it, or before.
Yeah.
Before post-production or something. Okay, yeah. So kind of makes you wonder, because I'm sure, because he probably died after the script had been finalized. So I'm wondering if they had to get Carl Sagan's permission to make any changes, or what kind of things would have allowed, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So here's what I found out.
Yeah.
The film adaptation. Sagan and his wife, Anne, actually wrote the story outline for the film. The screenplay was done by someone else, but apparently the story outline, though, which I guess would be the step kind of before the screenplay, was actually done by Sagan and his wife.
Okay. I mean, yeah, maybe Sagan just kind of softened toward religion near the end of his life or something. But I'll definitely be interested to see what changes, if any, were made from the book, or if the movie was pretty faithful to it.
Yeah, because the book was written in 1985, so you're looking at 12 years later.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you'll have to report back to us. I'll see if I can find a copy somewhere as well. And, it might be worth hopping on and doing a 15-20 minute follow-up just to talk about the book and any differences there.
Well, yeah, I'm enjoying doing these podcasts about movies, because aren't a whole lot of people that I know that I can talk movies or music with, or anything like that. So I've been enjoying the discussions we've been having here.
And I know we recap this for pretty much every one of these we do, but I think it's important to address this kind of thing. Nancy Pearcey has a great book out on, media and art and its interaction with apologetics. And I've listened to some great lectures at Biola who've certainly commented on, how we've kind of lost Hollywood, but we have to pull that kind of back into some of our apologetics. And that's why these kind of conversations are important to me. If somebody can take a movie and use that as a jumping off point for having a conversation about faith, then, we're making the most use of our time, and it's not just mindless consumption of media.
Right.
It's utilizing that for having good conversations. And
yeah, and that's kind of why I tend to gravitate toward movies like Contact, where it was written by an atheist, someone critical of Christianity, Carl Sagan, but I still gravitate toward it because it's thoughtful at the very least. And so if I'm going to, I don't, there are times when I do enjoy mindless entertainment. Like I said, I like kaiju monster movies. Pacific Rim is one of my favorite monster movies, and that one was a little smarter than monster movies tend to be. But it's not exactly very deep. A very deep movie. So there are times when I like to just kind of turn my brain off and just watch a movie just because I enjoy monsters fighting each other or whatever. But for the most part, I also enjoy movies like Contact or smart sci-fi movies that investigate something about the human condition. And so that, so it's not just mindless entertainment for me, but it's actually something that I can actually feel like I'm actually, I'm basically that I'm utilizing my time well by watching a movie that I can actually think about and, spurs these thoughts and discussions.
Yeah. And I think the more we can do that and kind of foster that among other believers, or even skeptics, who can use a movie as a chance to have a real conversation with a Christian.
Right.
I think we're furthering the dialogue, and I think that's a good thing. Like you said, if it's thought provoking and can help with those kind of conversations, then it seems to me that it's time well spent.
Yeah. Especially if you have kids or something you can watch the movie with. Contact might need to wait till they're older because there are a couple of profanities, and there is a post-sex scene in the film. So I probably wouldn't watch it with younger kids. But it's a good movie to watch with people in your life that you can have these discussions with. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one, once they're a little older, it's really not anything like a lot of the R-rated movies today. I think this one was PG-13, but
I think so, yeah.
It's nowhere near kind of the level of what you expect in a lot of Hollywood movies, content-wise. It's certainly one I'll be glad to. My oldest is probably old enough to dive into it now if it could maintain his interest. So I'd rather wait a few more years until it's something that he can gravitate towards a little more and enjoy kind of the science and everything that's kind of behind this one.
Yeah,
just makes it a fun movie when you can at least get somewhat behind understanding what they're kind of talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up for tonight. Good discussion, though. I think it was a good movie. I'm glad you picked it.
Thank you very much.
I would have missed out otherwise, and I really enjoyed this one. All right. So before we head out, where can listeners find more content from you, Clinton?
Yeah, well, you can always add me on Facebook or Twitter. I tend not to use Twitter as much, except to, post an article I've written or something, because Twitter has very few characters that you can use for your tweets, and so it's just not conducive to good conversations. So I don't even like to have unimportant conversations on it just because of the low character limit. But yeah, definitely you can find me on Facebook. I do write articles for the Secular Pro-Life blog, which you can find at blog.secularprolife.org. I also write articles for the Life Training Institute blog, which you can find at prolifetraining.com. And those are pretty much the main places you can find me.
All right, wonderful. And you can certainly find more by me over on the Question Christianity YouTube, as well, of course, as the Mentionables YouTube. So be sure to tune back in. We plan on returning with some more of these Mentionables apologetic theater in the future, so you never know what we'll have next. We've dealt a lot with first contact movies, so maybe we'll find another theme for our next 2 or 3 that we hit the listeners with.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and with that, I will go ahead and run our lovely outro.
All right.
And we will jam out to that, and we will see all the listeners next time.